Okay, this week we are reading Lines to a Critic by Shelley. Honey from silkworms who can gather, or silk from the yellow bee? The grass may grow in winter weather as soon as hate in me. Hate men who can't, and men who pray, and men who rail like thee. An equal passion to repay, they are not coy like me. Or seek some slave of power and gold to be thy dear heart's mate. Thy love will move that bigot cold sooner than me thy hate. A passion like the one I prove cannot divided be. I hate thy want of truth and love. How should I then hate thee? So, what is the basic discursive situation of this poem? Who's talking to who?
Well, I think the title sets it up. It's Lines to a Critic. And so the poem is a response to someone who's criticized the speaker. So, just keeping the situation in the back of our minds while reading it, I think will help make sense of the sentences.
Mm-hmm.
And because this poem is written by Shelley, it's rather intricate. There are a lot of inversions. So a stanza-by-stanza approach, where even with some of the sentences going through what the syntax might be, would be a good idea. So shall we begin with the first stanza?
Yeah, this is our first inversion. So, who can gather honey from silkworms, or silk from the yellow bee? The grass may grow in winter weather as soon as hate in me. So he's saying that hate is not going to grow in him anytime soon. Just like you can't get honey from silkworms or silk from a bee or grow grass in winter.
Right. And the thing is, he's inverting them. Because, if you want honey, you would go to a bee, not a silkworm. And likewise, if you wanted silk, you would go to a silkworm and not a bee. He's saying to the critic, if you're trying to provoke me, then I'm the wrong person to provoke. You're not going to get a rise out of me.
So who could he get a rise out of? This is one question that he seems to turn to in the second stanza.
Right, or the second stanza even seems like a response precisely to that question. Hate men who can't, and men who pray, and men who rail like thee. Who are these men?
So, men who can't. To cant is to talk hypocritically about something. Men who pray, perhaps men who entreaty, and men who rail. So men who would respond to criticism in a protesting way.
Yeah. Well, even if not vengeful, then outraged.
Yeah.
Definitely. I've just been thinking about pray. It could simply mean men who are sanctimonious. All of these people, this group, men who can't pray and rail, are people who the critic could get a rise out of.
Right. And so he's saying, in the continuation of that stanza, they are not coy like me to repay an equal passion. Okay, so he's saying that in contrast to them, I'm coy, perhaps reserved. So we had a discussion about what equal means here.
Well, I had initially taken equal to mean a passion that would match yours. And the fact that there was the word repay kind of indicated a transaction. So, you give me a passion, I will give you equal passion. Mm-hmm. But taking it that way made it difficult to understand what was going on. So then you actually had suggested, I think, what is a better reading, which is equal as in peaceful. You remain equal in all circumstances. That kind of idea. So, he's making a distinction here. There are men who respond to criticism by getting angry, and then there are people like me who remain coy, and this is another option.
Yeah. So, in the third stanza, he gives another suggestion to the critic.
Yes. I think it's a powerful or. This is how I read the poem so far. In the title, we learn that someone has criticized the speaker. Then the speaker comes in and says, "You're going to get nothing from me." And then in the second stanza, he says, "If you want to get a rise out of someone, go to these people because I'm coy and you're not going to get anything out of me. But if, as I suspect, your real goal is not to get a rise out of someone, but actually to move the world, to change the world, then perhaps critique is not the best way of doing that. It's not the best way of moving people. So instead of critiquing, you might try something else." And this is what I think he's proposing in the third stanza. So, "Or seek some slave of power and gold to be thy dear heart's mate. Thy love will move that bigot cold sooner than me thy hate." And how do you untangle that second line, or that second half of the stanza?
I believe that the bigot is the same person that he's referring to as the slave in the first part of that stanza. And he's a cold person. And the speaker is saying that your love can move in the sense of change or reform that cold bigot sooner than thy hate can move / reform me.
So he's opposing hate and love in their capacity to move.
Yeah. So there's an interesting interplay between, what can critique look like? So is it just hating, or can, this act of love also be critique?
Right. And I think anger and outrage are, righteous anger is often talked about as a revolutionary emotion, which I think it is, and it's an important emotion to have. What's less often talked about is the fact that love is a revolutionary emotion. Kindness is also revolutionary in a much more silent way, maybe, but in a no less effective way. And in fact, thinking just back on moments in my life where I was changed, it was more often because I was touched by kindness than because I was kind of rallied by anger.
Okay, so then in, I guess, the fourth stanza, he goes into a little bit more detail about what his kind of passion looks like.
Okay, in the second stanza, he made a distinction between his way of responding to criticism and other people's way of responding to criticism. Here he seems to make a similar distinction between his own way of critiquing and the critic's way of critiquing. Because his mode of critique has a nuance in it, and that nuance is division. That is, I can hate someone's opinions or someone's actions or the way they feel about something, but that doesn't mean that I hate them. Whereas the passion that the speaker provokes in the critic, a passion like the one I prove in you, cannot divided be. That is, I may hate what you do, but I love you. And I think that it's an important nuance to kind of make, especially in contexts where you get riled up, that you should still be able to care for someone, even if you really find their views hateful, is the general sense that I'm getting from this last stanza.
Mm-hmm. So one last thing that I wanted to say about this poem is that it does emerge from a real-life situation in which Shelley was critiqued by Southey. You can look him up if you would like. So they had a kind of dispute, and this poem was written along with another poem called Lines to a Reviewer. However, from our conversation, it's clear that this poem can speak to contexts beyond that original context in which it emerged. I mean, one question is, why would Shelley choose to respond to criticism in the form of a poem? And at times like these, when people want to change the world and they want to move people, and maybe they want to critique oppression or, whatever they would like to critique that they're seeing in the world, why would someone choose poetry? I feel like poets are always having to defend it. So one reason why somebody might choose poetry is that it allows us to play with language and to play with structures of address that might not be available to us in the real world. And that's sort of my takeaway from this poem.
I would agree with that. I mean, I think that a lot of the kind of antagonistic encounters that you have, arguments, you get mired in the specifics of the conversation, and you lose sight of the fact that you're really talking because much more is on the line. And I think writing gives you a distance from the situation that allows you to address it. Even if a poem arises out of a specific moment, it necessarily aims at something larger. I mean, the critic in question may have initially been Sadi, but actually, as we've seen, it's talking about any critic at all who takes a certain tack in pointing out things he or she doesn't like. The sentiment of the poem is something that I would do well to keep in mind personally, because when I get in heated conversations, I can't often make that nuance that Shelley talks about at the end. And I think that if I kept this in mind, that it would make me much more patient. That is to separate a person's opinions from who they are. Lines to a critic. Honey from silkworms, who can gather? Or silk from the yellow bee? The grass may grow in winter weather as soon as hate in me. Hate men who can't, and men who pray, and men who rail, like thee. An equal passion to repay, they are not coy like me. Or seek some slave of power and gold to be thy dear heart's mate. Thy love will move that bigot cold sooner than me thy hate. A passion like the one I proved cannot divided be. I hate thy want of truth and love. How should I then hate thee?